Okay, so I'm just going to dive into it. We're not going to do a soft start. We're just going to go because we've got stuff to do. In 1 Chronicles 17, if you just want to flip back, I'm not going to actually read, but I want to remind you of this. When God made his promise to David, which is my fourth key passage of the Old Testament, remember, David's kingdom was established. David built up his own house, and he said, I'm living in this great house, and God's living in a tent. I want to build him a house, a temple. And God said, no, it's not for you to build a temple for me. And part of the great promise is, God said to David, your son will build a temple for me. And we see that's what Solomon did. But even more than that, it points to Jesus and what Jesus has done, which is us. Jesus has built this great house for the Lord. The descendant of David has built the house of the Lord. So we talked about that. But God said to David, no, you can't build my house. So that brings us to chapter 22. And can somebody please read verses 2 through 5. 1 Chronicles 22, verses 2 through 5. This is our introduction for the class. All right, thanks, Jim. You see that? Verse 5 is like the title of the class. But it's a whole verse, so it's too long to be a title. But verse 5 is the point. David said, my son is young and inexperienced, and the house that is to be built for the Lord must be exceedingly magnificent. So God says, your son is going to be the one to do the job. And David says, okay, but this has to be awesome. This has to be really good. And it has to show the fame and the glory throughout all the lands. And so here's what David says. He says, I will therefore make preparation for it. That might have been our title. What did I have for the title? I think that's where the title came from. Yeah, preparing for God's house. So God said, you're not the one to build the house, but David says, but I'm still going to get ready for it. I'm going to do everything I can to prepare for this house that my son is going to build. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but just to kind of get your brain moving in the direction that I would like for us to go, this is what I'm trying to take for it. Let's kind of take some principles out of David's words and actions in this section and say, okay, here we are. You know, it works out really good right now. Here we are on the upstairs, and there's a whole new generation on the downstairs. And if we say to ourselves, they're going to build God's house, which is a principle that you could do. I mean, they're going to be workers in the Lord's kingdom. They're going to go out and they're going to build up the church. The principles that I want to see, what did David do to prepare the next generation to build God's awesome house? Those are the principles that I'm looking for. And it would be, really good for us, parents, grandparents, but you don't have to be in that category. For us as a congregation, what can we do to prepare for the next generation to build God's awesome house? That's the direction that I'd like to learn from in this morning. But do this. Look over. Keep your marker here. 1 Chronicles 22. This is going to be our text. You might write this in the margin next to what we just read, but turn over to Psalm 132. And we won't read the whole psalm. But would somebody please read Psalm 132 in verses 1 through 5? Yeah. What if we do that? That's why I'm here. What if we say, as God's people, I'm not going to sleep and I'm not going to rest until I've found the place where God's house is going to be built and I've prepared the next generation to build it. Done everything I could. And that everything I could, there's one more thing that I want to go to. Go back to 1 Chronicles. It's the very end of this section, 1 Chronicles 29. 1 Chronicles 29 in verses 1 and 2. And this is the end of the story. This is where we're going to end class today. And I'll just read verses 1 and 2. David the king said to all the assembly, Solomon my son, whom alone God has chosen, is young and inexperienced, and the work is great, for the palace will not be for man, but for the Lord God. So I have provided for the house of my God so far as I was able. The gold and the things and all of this stuff that he lists out here. But what if that's what we're able to say? When you're laying on your deathbed, reflecting on the life that you lived, what if you were able to say, so far as I was able, I did everything I could to get things ready for my son to build God's house. That's the goal, so far as I was able. So that's what I'd like to accomplish. Anything you want to say about any of this stuff before we get started? Let's see what I have here. Principles. 1, 2, 3, 4 and a half. Maybe 5. We'll see how it goes. I want to get through at least 4 principles. Okay, number 1. Before I click it up on the board, I'd like for someone to read verses 6 through 10, 1 Chronicles 22, 6 through 10. And, this is not like the things that I say. I'm not pulling out a verse that says this thing. I want to see what principle you see, if you see a principle in this. So 22 verses 6 through 10. Somebody read it, and then when we're done, tell us what you think the principle is, or if there is one. God specifically said, we talked about this when we talked about God's promise to David, when we were looking at 2 Samuel 7. It's not in 2 Samuel 7. We looked at this passage, but David said, I want to build you a house. And God specifically said to him, you have too much blood on your hands. You're a man of war. And so it's not for you to do this thing. It's going to be for your son, who will be a man of rest, to do this thing. So what's the principle, Maria?
But wasn't he a man of war because as great as David was, and as many times as it's mentioned, how faithful he was to God, and he was after God's own heart. Ultimately, he was a man of war because there were those times where he wasn't trusting the Lord.
Well,
like he should have.
And what your comment will make me, this is where it's not directly related to your comment, but you made me think about this. I think we will look at what David did and say, it's not bad. What he did is not wrong. He was fighting. I don't want to say it because I'm gonna point to what I want to talk about this morning, but David was clearing out the weeds and the field so that his son could have a canvas to paint on. Not supposed to mix metaphors. So that his son could have a place to plant his crops. So it's not wrong that David was a man of war. David provided the environment for his son to work. But the point is that, and I think this is kind of what Kevin was saying, while David was preparing the environment, he was busy doing other things and not doing the work that his son Solomon would do later. I don't know of one. I do have as many references in the in the Old Testament that I found. I think there's 3 of them that talk about, you have blood on your hands, you can't build my house. I'll give those to you if you remind me after class. But I don't think off the top of my head, I don't think any of them say, and here's the reason why. This is only Ryan's 2 cents on it. I think if you're busy doing this, then you can't be doing that. Look at 1 Kings 4, just to kind of push this forward just a tiny little bit. In 1 Kings chapter 4, Excuse me. 1 Kings 4, would somebody read verses 20 and 21 when you get there? This is Solomon, and it's a description of, so that's what David fought for. David fought so that Solomon could live in this, so Israel could live in this peace and safety and occupy themselves with building God's house that had to be awesome. Cindy? Yeah. So, yes, so I'm going to just push it forward just a tiny bit and we can move on here. But this is what I think of. You know, every generation's got to do their own work. I think we need to teach every generation to do their own work. But I would like to think, this is not a criticism, I think that I don't want to say accomplished it as if we've arrived, but I think we've done okay at this. But you see these congregations in these churches, either the local church or churches and other churches, butting heads and fighting and bickering and constant, just constant, this is what we're going to do. It's almost as if my function is to walk into church and have a fight with Paul about something, And I don't know if you've ever seen that sort of thing among Christians before, but the goal is to kind of fight to undo that nonsense. Like, let's do what we have to do so that the waters will be calm, and when our kids inherit what we leave them, they're able to take those calm waters and do something with it, do something productive. I keep thinking of my lessons this morning, and I'm just going to jump all the way to the main point of the two things that I'm going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the parable of the sower this morning, and then we're going to talk about what we're supposed to do with the parable of the sower. Tonight we'll talk about that. And, the goal is not to plant the seed, and the goal is not for the seed to grow. The goal is for that seed to grow into something that produces fruit. And so we clear out the rocks and we pull up the weeds, and hopefully the fruit can come. That's the goal. That's the thing that we're working towards. And I just think we fight for peace so that our kids don't have to. They can do the work that needs to be done. Anything you want to say about that? It's just principle. We're only talking principle here. So, you can critique the generality, but I'm just thinking in big terms. I always think, this is one of my guiding principles out of the book of James. The wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable and open to reason and all those other things. But you can have peace and all of the other stuff, and if it's not pure, it's not okay. The wisdom from above is first pure, and that's something worth fighting for. But hopefully the goal is not to fight and fight and fight and fight and fight and fight and fight. The goal is to fight for peace so that we can build and grow.
I was just going to say, winners make the rules, and winners write the history. Without David, and Solomon could not have peace. You have to win.
Yeah.
In spiritual terms, that's us too.
Right. I'm probably bickering at you all about my own handful of bad experiences, and it doesn't have anything to do with you, and that's perfectly fine. But it's just like, whenever you're a part of a congregation and all they do is bicker, nothing else gets done. It's like, the goal is not to bicker eternally forever. The goal is to find a spot where we can do the work.
This kind of reminds me of, so we've had that study where we're going through the first few chapters of Luke, and it kind of reminds me of John the Baptist clearing the way for Jesus. And it's kind of like David is the bulldozer just making the way flat for Solomon to come in.
Yeah, that's a great picture.
Seems like a type of that, maybe.
Yeah, great picture. I love that. I'm going to write that in my notes. Okay, next. Anything else? It's just a principle. I read through this and I think, hey, look, this is what David did to get ready for his son. I need to be doing that. That's all it is. Principle. Number 2. Somebody, would you read verses 11 through 13?
Now, my son, the Lord be with you, so that you may succeed in building the house of the Lord your God, as he has spoken concerning you. Only may the Lord grant you discretion and understanding, that when he gives you charge over Israel, you may keep the law of the Lord your God. Then you will prosper if you are careful to observe the statutes and the rules that the Lord commanded Moses for Israel. Be strong and courageous. Fear not, do not be dismayed.
Okay, so I just tried to itemize that. Whenever I itemize something in my Bible, I stick dots next to it. So here's a point, here's a point, here's a point. Those are the points that I have in verse 12. This is what David says to Solomon. May the Lord grant you discretion and understanding. But that's not the point. Why? Why, like discretion and understanding for what? And he gets to the end of it. You have to skip through a couple of words, but he gets to the end of the point. May the Lord grant you discretion and understanding. Why? That you may keep the law of the Lord your God. Here's what I want God to do for you. I want you to understand and to truly know how important it is to live your life according to this book, according to what God has said. I don't want you to just do it. I want you to know it. I want you to have discretion and understanding about this. So that's number 1, discretion and understanding to keep the law of the Lord your God. Verse 13, number 2, to carefully observe the statutes, the rules that the Lord commanded Moses. It's kind of the same point, but at least deserves its own bullet point, I think. Number 3, be strong and courageous. Number 4, fear not. I'm going to say something that I don't know if it's true. Maybe somebody can fact check this. I see it on Twitter almost every day. Somebody among the people that I follow, the people write about this all the time. Somebody says the phrase fear not or do not fear in the Bible is said 365 times, which means there's one for every day. And I've even seen somebody say, again, I don't know if this is true. I've not checked it. I really don't have any desire to check it. But, the principle is the same even if it's not true. But they said that phrase fear not is the command offered more than any other command in the Bible. One for every day, more than anything else. I think about that when I see it. Be strong and courageous. Do not fear. Number 5, do not be dismayed. I even looked up the definition of dismayed to see what we're talking about here. Consternation or distress, typical, caused by something unexpected. Don't lose your mind when something unexpected happens, So the idea is let's prepare our kids to get to this spot. Anyway, I called this point, live with God. Maybe we'll get here by the end, but I want to at least point to some of these things while we're here. 1 Chronicles 28 and verses 9 and 10. The heading in my ESV says David's charge to Solomon, and this is what he says. And you, Solomon, my son, know the God of your father and serve him with a whole heart, with a willing mind. For the Lord searches all hearts and understands every plan and thought. If you will seek him, he will be found by you. But if you forsake him, he will cast you off forever. Be careful now, for the Lord has chosen you to build a house for a sanctuary, and be strong and do it. So I'm inclined to think this might be the first thing on the list. Even before we prepare the canvas for our kids to paint on, for the next generation to paint on, know God, live with God, serve God, obey God, whatever variation of that you want to call it. That's our job. Be strong and do it. Fear not. Go forth.
This is reminding me of like Aaron. He did not stand up against the people when they wanted to build that
he wanted to do rather than what the law said. And that's the same thing for us. If we don't do what the Bible says, then we need to be, somebody needs to be strong enough to say, wait, we need to do what the law says.
Yeah.
And that takes courage.
Yeah.
Because it's easier to let it go.
Right.
Oh, that's not a big deal.
Yeah.
It'll go away. And
S-
that won't.
Yeah.
It'll keep getting worse.
So one of the points on this one that I have thinking about how practically we do this with the next generation, you can't give what you don't have. You can't tell your kids, fear God, know God, serve God, obey God. You can't just tell all of those people downstairs if they don't see it happening. That's our takeaway. I mean, that's my takeaway. My job is to read this list and not just primarily be focused on handing it down, but to think, okay, here's what I do. God grant me discretion and understanding that I may keep the law of the Lord my God, to carefully observe his statutes and the rules the Lord God command, to be strong and courageous, to not fear, and to not be dismayed. Probably I need to do some work on the don't be dismayed. Okay, number trace, verse 14. I'm only using verse 14 on this one because it kind of leads into some other stuff here that we can talk about. Verse 14 says, with great pains I have provided for the house of the Lord. And then this is what he says, 100,000 talents of gold, 1,000,000 talents of silver, bronze, iron, beyond weighing. For there is so much of it, timber and stone too. I have provided. To these you must add. So I guess I was wrong, Becky. I said that's going to be the next point. This is the one I was thinking of with this one. David spends his life, or at least the end of his life, providing the tools and the equipment that the next generation is going to need to build God's house. I have provided you with what you need to do this job. And then he says, and to the things that I've given you, you need to add to it. There's some other stuff that I want to point to here, just real quick before we dive into a principle. 28. I keep going to 28 because this is the end of it where he says, he kind of wraps it up with Solomon. Verses 11 and 12. David gave Solomon his son the plan of the vestibule of the temple and its houses, its treasuries, its upper rooms, the inner chambers, the room for the mercy seat, the plan of all that he had in mind for the courts of the house of the Lord, all the surrounding chambers, the treasury, the house of God, the treasuries. And so David gave Solomon the plan. This is the plan. This is how we're going to do this thing. I've prepared for it. Here's the plan. I really like that word. I grabbed onto that word. Verses 19 and 20. All this he made clear to me in writing from the hand of the Lord, all the work to be done according to the plan. Then David said to Solomon his son, be strong and courageous and do it. Do not be afraid. Do not be dismayed. For the Lord God, even my God, is with you. He will not leave you or forsake you until all the work of the service of the house of the Lord is finished. I like that a lot. Here's what David did. He gave the next generation all the work to be done according to the plan. Here's the plan. Execute the plan. Since you talk about the model thing and Adam's comment, I almost jumped ahead when Adam made this comment. But I like this a lot. Just in terms of principle stuff. Look at 1 Chronicles 14. It's almost petty. I could just talk about it and not read it, but I like this. 1 Chronicles 14 and verse 1, Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David, and cedar trees, also masons and carpenters, to build his house for him. And so here's David making all of these preparations and collecting all of this stuff to build up the house, and he's working with Hiram. And now look over at 1 Kings chapter 5. Listen, part of this is you all just have to deal with me. We've been thinking an awful lot about this stuff. This is, I hope Luke comes home for Christmas. next year at school, but Luke's leaving for school, and I've been writing my list. I type everything, so it takes me a long time to handwrite stuff, and so I've got 3 lists. I've got rules for life, rules for preaching and teaching, and money rules. And I've been writing them all out. I'm on like page 8. And so I'm thinking, I'm getting ready to send my kid out. You all just have to deal with me because that's where I am. But that's what. So David works with Hiram, the king of Tyre, to get all of his stuff, to get these trees and these cedars. In 1 Kings chapter 5 and verse 6, chapter 5 and verse 1. Now Hiram, king of Tyre, sent his servants to Solomon when he heard that they had anointed him king in the place of his father. And Solomon says in verse 3, David, my father cannot build a house for the name of the Lord. And here's what I love about this. Maria and Adam, this is what your comments reminded me of. David did this. He worked with Hiram, king of Tyre, to get the stuff. And then guess what his son did? His son did what the dad did. He worked with Hiram, king of Tyre, to get the stuff that he needed to build the house. And I see that and it's like, man, yes, let's do that. Let's do the stuff that we should be doing and hope that our kids are watching and teach them. And then they will do it. And hopefully it's the good thing to do, the right thing to do. That's the goal. I also wanted to touch on this, what David said to Solomon. I've made all of these great pains to do this stuff. Now you do it. And I won't open this door wide open for everybody, but I will at least tell you, some of the motivation, not all of it, truly not all of it, but some of the motivation for my lessons this morning and this evening are some mistakes that my kids have made recently. I don't want you to think I'm bashing them. It's not like into the world stuff. But we're just trying to do some, course correct stuff. And I've thought a lot about this. If you make preparations for your kids or for the next generation, and you say, now you go do it, it's really hard, but you got to let them do it. Like, they're going to mess some stuff up. And you just got to, I'll tell you this one. This is not related to what we're talking about, but Lily's been driving, and it didn't come as fast for her as it came for Lou. It hasn't come as fast for her as it came for Lou. And so this morning we're driving up Old State. Lots of you were talking about this. And there's a car in the road. Like, here's the middle line, and the car's over the line. And she goes, what do I do? And my response recently has been, nobody say anything. So you got to figure this out. It's not like we're going to be driving with you for the rest of your life. You got to, do I turn now? Do I turn now? Nobody say anything. We got to let them do it. And I like that a lot. We got to let our young men lead singing. Even though sometimes we just had to let them. We got to let them. We got to train them. We got to get them there. We got to let our young men do lessons. This summer, I got to talk. I'm already getting the talk ready. We're going to have an intern come in. And you all will hear before he gets here, me stand up and say, he's learning. We have to let them learn, which means we have a job. And so anyway, Solomon says, I made preparation for you. Now go do it, which means we got to say, let him do it. Okay, that's it. We're reading about David at the end of his life, and there's so much these are considered boring chapters in the Bible. And I collected this, and I did this, and I prepared this. There's so much gold to be taken out of this. I love it so much. Verses 17 through 19, 1 Chronicles 22, 17 through 19. I'm just going to burn through these last couple ones so that we can finish. David also commanded all the leaders of Israel to help Solomon his son. There's the key. To help Solomon his son. And look, in chapter 23, just look at the headings. David organizes the Levites. In 24, David organizes the priest in chapter 25. David organizes the musicians in 26, the gatekeepers in 26. In verse 20, the treasurers and the officials. In 27, he gets the military in order. In 27:16, he gets the tribes in order. And all of this stuff, and here's what David did. He didn't just prepare his son. He surrounded his son with people who were going to help him be successful. He paved the way, which is why I say this over and over again, and I know that so many of you will just get tired probably of me saying it, but I am so thankful and so blessed that we've been able to raise our kids in this congregation, because that's what this is to us. To raise our kids and to surround them with people who aren't treading water, but are helping them be successful in the future. I think about there's this young, I call them young, I think they're in their 20s, this batch of kids in this congregation, and they get together with their friends, and they have Bible studies, and I know the ladies are doing some of that stuff. The young girls are doing. They get together and they invite and they take these young girls, and they're working with these young girls and helping them to build their faith and all that. And then what I've watched is nobody told them to do it. I'm a little ashamed that I didn't tell them to do it, but our young kids downstairs have watched what those kids have done, and now they're doing it. It's like they're just seeing it happen, and that's what this is. David surrounded his son with people who were going to help him be successful. And the last thing that I'll just throw up here, I don't think we'll have time. Maybe we can just finish with this. Look at the end. Chapter 29 and verses 10 through 22. We won't have time to comment about this, but it seems like there's two things involved here. The heading above verse 10 says David prays in the assembly. So point number one is none of what we're talking about should or can possibly be done without prayer. That's at the top of our list too. Like, we're praying about this stuff constantly. When I go around and do gospel meetings, I always talk about Bob Kyle. I call you by name too. Every time Bob prays, he always prays for our kids. Say, we got this guy in our congregation who always does this every time. You can't do what we're doing without prayer. It's not possible. Verse 10. Listen to the prayer. There's points by itself. Therefore David blessed the Lord in the presence of all the assembly, and David said, Blessed are you, O Lord, the God of Israel, our Father, forever and ever. Yours, O Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the victory and the majesty, for all that is in the heavens and in the earth is yours. Yours is the kingdom, O Lord. You are exalted as head above all. Both riches and honor come from you. You rule over all. In your hand are power and might, and in your hand it is to make great, to give strength to all. And now we thank you, our God, and praise your glorious name. Just to tell you kind of like what I would like to do with that, David very clearly knew God and how to praise him and how to worship him. And hopefully that's something that our people will see. Verse 13, he's thankful. Now we thank you, O God. Remember Romans 1? You didn't know God and you didn't give thanks to God. And it led to all kinds of stuff. David was thankful. Verse 14, but who am I? Not only did David know who God was, he knew who he was. But who am I and what is my people that we should be able thus to offer willingly? For all these things come from you, and of your own have we given you. We are strangers before you and sojourners, as all our fathers were. Our days on earth are like a shadow. There is no abiding. There's a great point in all of that. And then some of the stuff that he said, verse 19. Grant to Solomon my son a whole heart, that he may keep your commandments, your testimonies, your statutes, performing all that he may build the palace for which I have made provision. Then David said to all the assembly, and he worships, does this great thing. So I have a passage, and I'm not going to do it because probably the bell's already rung. So I'll just say this one last thing, and I'll be done. There's a place in the text where it says David stored up all of these great provisions for the temple, and then when you read after Solomon builds and dedicates the temple, it says, and Solomon took the stuff that his dad prepared and offered it in the temple. And David wasn't even around to see it, but it gives me goosebumps to think. We're doing some work right now in preparing the next generation for something that we may not even see. But what they used to build God's house hopefully came from us. We're going to give it to them. All right. Thanks for your comments this morning. I'm sorry I didn't leave too much